Well, the young man's name was Dan. He was 30 years old, and he was living at home still with his father. His mother had died about 5 years prior to that. And he had just kind of bumped along in life, never really growing up. But he was working at his father's company, which his father owned. And there came that kind of seminal moment in every young man's life where you realize, he's about 30 years old, that it's time for me to grow up. And I just need to start to man up with my life. And so I need to take charge of my job and take charge of my career. I need to take charge of my finances. I probably need to get married and have children and really start to live as an adult in this world. Now, he knew that when his father, who was sickly, would die, he was going to inherit the family business. He was an only child, and so he was going to come into a fortune. Well, about a week later, they had a big shareholder meeting, and there were hundreds of people in the auditorium. And his father was leading the meeting, but his father was very sickly and on the road to dying. And the young man, Dan, saw a young woman in the group that just looked to him just like a goddess, just a drop-dead gorgeous, and he was like just stunned. And he went over to meet her and to talk to her. And he was surprised that she seemed interested in him because to him, she was clearly out of his league. And when the meeting was over, he rushed back over, met her, and he said to her after a few little introductory remarks, I may really not look like much to you, but I'm the son of the owner of the company, and when he dies, I'm going to inherit $200 million. And she was quite impressed, and she smiled, and it seemed like she was engaging with him. And she said, do you have a business card? And he was surprised that she asked, and he pulled one out, and she smiled again. And then they parted ways. And the end of the story is 3 days later, she became his stepmother. Now, I've heard it said that sometimes women are better at long-term financial planning than men. Surely this woman was one of those. Well, last week we started a series called How God Uses Money to Shape Us. And the idea of this series is that God uses something tangible that we can see and we can mark and we can look at the bank and our Quicken and things that are tangible. And he uses these things in our life to build character in us, to expose our values that need reshaping, and to build character in us. And to build devotion. And so that's what this series is about. How does God use money to shape us? And last week we looked at the first principle of ownership, is that even though we talk about ownership, from the Bible's point of view, God owns everything. He owns what you and I have. And our role is to be stewards of what he has entrusted to us. This is one of the great ways to deal with stress. This principle of stewardship is the antidote to financial stress. If it really belongs to God, it really is up to him. Whenever things are tight, this is more his problem than it is my problem. That's last week's message. Today, we'll look at the flip side of ownership and what does stewardship look like. And the title of the message is Responsibility. And there are 5 things the Bible tells us that we are responsible to do with money. Responsibility number one is to honor God. In Deuteronomy 17:1, the writer says, do not sacrifice to the Lord your God an ox or a sheep that has any defect or flaw in it, for that would be detestable to him. And so the idea was that back then in worship, they would bring a sacrificial lamb or a goat or something to sacrifice. And what the tendency of the people was to do was to bring not the sheep or the cow or the ox that would bring top dollar on the market, but one that might have only 3 legs or was old and was about to die and would not bring top market on this. And you might think about, well, this seems sort of like, seems kind of odd. Imagine though, if you wanted to donate a car to a church or to a nonprofit organization, and you had an old car like one I drive, 23 years old, and you had another car that might be only 5 years old, which car are you more than likely going to donate to the nonprofit? Well, what's easy to do is the 23-year-old car. And that's what these people were doing. They came to worship. But what the end of the verse says is that would be detestable to God. Now, why? Because what God is wanting to do with worship and money is to help us to have hearts that honor him, not to be a chiseler in our hearts. The issue is one of importance. What is really of top value in our lives? Proverbs 3:9 and 10 says, honor the Lord with your wealth, the first fruits of all your crops. Then your barns will be filled to overflowing, and your vats will brim over with new wine. The idea is that money is one of these things, and how we use it, and how we spend it, how we give it, is one of these things that is constantly recalibrating our heart. It's recalibrating our values and our character, and what's most important and what's least important. And when we do what Deuteronomy 17:1 says, sort of live as chiselers, so to speak, then we are reinforcing or recalibrating our heart in the wrong direction, in a direction that should be moving in the other in terms of honoring God. It's a matter of priority of what's highest value. That's also in your handout. So let me ask you just a question. When you get a paycheck, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Where's that money going to go? Normally, what comes to your mind are the things that are of real highest value to you. First, second, third, or fourth. And what God is trying to do with money in our lives is make it to where we really want to honor God with money, to where when we get a paycheck, the first thing we think about is how can I honor God with what I have. The second responsibility is to pay your bills ASAP. 1 Timothy 5:8 says, if anyone does not provide for his own relatives, and especially for his own family, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Now, when we got married years ago, I was working part-time as a house painter, being a bivocational pastor, meaning I had a regular job, which painting houses. And I was raising part of my salary to be an associate pastor in the church we'd helped start in Texas. And we were living on a shoestring. Now, I had never made a budget as a single guy, didn't have to. But suddenly I am having to make a budget. And so we had a guy in our church who was a CPA. He became a very, very good friend of mine. His name was Randy Boytz. And if you want to know more about Randy Boytz, you can ask Mindy, and she will sing his praises. So I said, can you help me with this? So we had breakfast, and he sat down and helped me with a budget and how to make a budget and how to manage a budget through the course of the month. But one of the questions he asked me, he says, how do you and Mindy make financial decisions? And I said, well, basically, she'll come to me and she said, Seth, do we have money to purchase this? And he said, and how do you normally answer that question? I said, well, what ends up happening is if we just got paid, like on the 15th and the 30th, my answer is, sure, we've got the money. But if we're closer to the 15th and the 30th in time, and there's not that much money in there, my answer is generally to say, no, we can't do that until we get paid. And he said to me, he said, this is one of the reasons why you're on a shoestring budget. And he pointed out this particular verse in Proverbs 3:27. Do not withhold good from those who deserve it, which is in your power to act. Do not say to your neighbor or the electric company or the water company or to Shell or Exxon, do not say to your neighbor, come back later, I'll give it tomorrow, when you now have it with you. And so one of the things he said, he encouraged me with, he said, Seth, when you get paid on the 15th and 30th, there are two things you should immediately do. You should write a check in your giving. That's the first thing, honor God. And then pay your bills that you know are due between now and your next paycheck. And he said, now take all your bills and figure out in the paycheck how much you're going to pay for this on the 30th, which is usually, back then involved rent, which was a little bit more. And then the middle of the month, a lot of other bills that added up to about the same as rent. And pay those as soon as you get paid. That will give you a more accurate amount of money that you really have to spend. And I remember thinking, golly, that just seems so simple. How could that have escaped me? But it obviously did. And so when we started doing this, we get paid on the 15th and 30th back there in Texas. And I would write out my checks to our church and other giving things we were involved with. And we would pay whatever bills needed to be paid with that particular paycheck. And what it did was it brought the voice of reality to our financial situation through the course of the month. Hebrews 13:5 says, keep your lives free from love of money. Be content with what you have, for God has said, never will I fail you, never will I forsake you. Well, the first responsibility is to honor God. Second is pay your bills ASAP. The third responsibility is budgeting. Proverbs 27:23 says, be sure you know the condition of your flocks. Now he's talking to shepherds and ranchers here. But what he's saying to us is, be sure you know what you own and what you owe and what you earn and what you spend is the idea here. Your livelihood. Give careful attention to your herds, for riches do not endure forever, and a crown is not secure for all generations. Now, sometimes I've heard well-meaning Christians say, well, we're just trusting God for our money. Well, that is a good thing to do that, but it's not a thing by itself. We are called to trust God with our money, but we are also stewards, as we looked at last week, and we are to be responsible with what we have, and one of the ways that helps us to do that is to do what Proverbs 27 says, is to budget. He answers the question, why? When the hay is removed and new growth appears and the grass from the hills is gathered in, the lambs will provide you with clothing and the goats with the price of a field. So what he's saying here is that you can't just be thinking about today and tomorrow, but you also have to be thinking ahead, the next season or a year ahead here, budgeting. And so when I first did this with my CPA friend, he had me list down 4 things. What do you owe? Which at that point that was a very short list. What do you own? Again, a very short list generally. What do you bring in and what do you spend? And that was kind of the beginning of knowing the condition of our flocks. The fourth responsibility is diligence. Diligence. And there are different ways that you and I try to escape diligence. We try to avoid this, and there are 6 enemies of diligence that maybe you have some experience with, as I do. 6 enemies of diligence. The first is good intentions. When I was growing up, one of the things my mother drilled into me over and over again was, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And I think this had a lot to do with doing homework. I'll do it later. I'll do it tonight, kind of thing. The road paved with good intentions. Proverbs 14:23. All hard work brings a profit, but mere talk tends only to poverty. Now, what does this have to do with our finances? Well, think about work. Do you have good intentions about being a good employee at work? Maybe how much time do you get for lunch? Is that the amount of time that you take? Or the amount of time that you take for a coffee break? Or do you tend to sort of to nudge over more than you do? When you think about what time am I supposed to be at work, is that just a good idea and you just sort of show up whenever you want to? Or when it's time to leave for work, do you find yourself leaving for work early? Now, one of the ways that God gets our attention on things like this is through money. And there are times when we have to say to God, why are things so tight? Is there something you're trying to do in my life here? Something you're trying to shape or to form in me? And diligence is usually one of those things. Haste is another enemy of diligence, Proverbs 21:5, the plans of the diligent lead to profit as surely as haste leads to poverty. Now, one of the best studies I've ever done personally in my life was out of the book of Proverbs, and I looked at every verse that had these words in it: lazy, sloth, diligence, and there's one more that escapes me. But I looked at those verses, and I think there were about 20 of those things. And I looked at those verses, and each of them was sort of knocking on my door. Like, Seth, there's something here that you need to work on this thing of diligence. And one of the things that struck me was that this verse here, the plans of the diligent lead to profit as surely as haste leads to poverty. The way I evaluated my day, I come home from work and Mindy said, how was your day? The way I evaluated my day was generally, how many boxes did I check off on my to-do list? Now, having a to-do list is good. Checking off boxes is a good thing. But just because I checked off a lot of boxes does not necessarily mean I was diligent. What I started to observe about myself was that I was checking. It's easy to check off a lot of boxes if the boxes you're checking off are easy things to get done and things that can be done quickly and don't involve somebody else, sort of simple things. And the boxes that weren't getting checked were the more difficult things. They're more project related. It was going to take some time and involve other people. And what suddenly struck me was that I was living in one element as if I was diligent because I was checking off all these boxes, while at the same time, some of the bigger, more important projects that needed attention and that could not be done in a single day were not getting enough attention. In other words, it felt like I was being diligent without actually being diligent. You follow this? This is a really, really important principle, and this just jarred me in terms of how I think about my life with diligence. The third enemy of diligence is laziness. The sluggard's craving will be the death of him because his hands refuse to work. What Solomon is describing here is the person who talks a good game. He wants to work hard. He wants to do his best. And because he craves it so much, that's really enough. He really doesn't have to be a hard worker or to do. It's just enough to talk a good game. This is contrasted with Proverbs 6. Go to the ant, you sluggard. There was the word I was missing a minute ago, the sluggard. Consider its ways and be wise. The ant has no commander, no overseer, no ruler, yet it stores its provisions in summer and gathers its food at harvest. Now, what's he saying here? He's saying the ants aren't waiting around to get direction from the CEO or the boss or their project manager. The ants are self-starters. At work, in your work, are you a self-starter? Or do you tend to be a boss watcher and only end up doing as much as the boss expects you to do or checks up on you? How much does the boss need to check up on what you do? My father, when he was in business, told me that one of the things he did as a manager and a president of the company was that his employees every week had projects they were working on. And the standard he set was, what you tell me you're going to do by our next meeting, I expect to be done. Now, if you can't get it done, if it's not going to get done several days before our meeting, I want to know that before our meeting. What you cannot do at our company is show up at the meeting with that homework assignment not done. That's what he's talking about here. Laziness. Go to the ant. Be a self-starter, not a boss watcher. The fourth enemy is procrastination. The lazy man does not roast his game, but the diligent man prizes his possessions. And here the imagery is really good. A guy is out in the country, and he needs to get game for his family, and so he goes hunting. And he's got his bow and arrow or his spear, and he catches something, and he drags it home. But there it's sitting at his front door. But then he goes into his lazy boy recliner. I'm just too tired to skin the animal and to fix it for dinner. This is a picture of procrastination. What does this mean for us? Finishing projects that we say we're going to do. The fifth enemy is excuses. The sluggard says, there's a lion in the streets, or I will be murdered in the streets. And one of the things I'm amazed at is my ability to come up with excuses for things. You know, if mental gymnastics was an Olympic sport, there are times in my life where I think I would have racked up a number of gold medals. Excuses for why things aren't done. And I was going to get to that. I was going to get to that on Tuesday. As opposed to, am I starting off on something and making some progress today, little by little? And then the last one is little compromises. Little compromises. And we have a garden in our backyard, and one of the nemesis for the gardener is weeds. And weeds are just prolific. This is a hand-to-hand contest with the weeds against yours truly. And it just never goes away. It always has to be taken care of. Solomon talks about in Proverbs 24, I love this imagery. He says, behold, I passed by the field of a sluggard, of a vineyard of a man without sense. Lo, it was all overgrown with thorns. Its ground was covered with nettles, and its stone wall was broken down. Then I saw and considered. I looked and received instruction. Now, what did he observe from that field broken down? A little sleep, a little slumber, just a little folding of the hands to rest. And poverty will come upon you like a vagabond, and want or scarcity like an armed man. Now, as he walks by this field, there's not a sign, the farmer or the rancher does not have a sign that says, this is the field of a sluggard. There's not a sign that says, this is the vineyard of a man without sense. He just looks at this and he draws this conclusion. Oh, there's something wrong here. And then he asks himself, what happened? What happened to this? And the conclusion that he draws is there are lots of little compromises on things that don't get done. And sometimes God uses money in our lives, or the lack of money, to sharpen us in this fourth area of diligence. The fifth responsibility is saving. Proverbs 22:3 says, a prudent man sees danger and takes refuge, but the simple go on and suffer for it. The simple here is a technical term in the Hebrew language. It means the simpleton. And the simpleton is naive about life. It'll all work out. You're overthinking this, Pastor Seth. It can't be this complicated. Marriage can't be this complicated. Finances can't be. Work can't be this complicated. That's how the simpleton fool thinks. He contrasts that with the prudent, which sees danger ahead and takes action or contingencies in spite for this. Now, one of the things that I learned the hard way when we were newly married and trying to work on our budget was the unexpected expenses. Now, what I had to learn the hard way was that almost all unexpected expenses should be expected. Your car's going to break down. Your refrigerator is going to break down. Your washing machine is going to break down. There are things that happen in life that you don't expect. And when you're making a budget, sometimes things like car maintenance or appliance maintenance or clothes have to be added to this budget, because eventually it moves from it may be unexpected to you, but in reality it's expected. Now, my friend, my CPA friend, as I'm thinking about this, says, oh my God, how do you do that? How do you set aside money for this? He said, well, just start here, Seth. Make a one item on your budget that just says unexpected and put that money in savings every month so that when the unexpected happens, at least you've got something towards that. And then later on, you can allocate car repair, purchasing a car with cash, vacation money, other things like that. Proverbs 30:24 says, 4 things on earth are small, yet they are extremely wise. Extremely wise. Ants are creatures of little strength, yet they store up their food in summer. The idea here is foresight. Extremely wise means foresight, looking ahead for contingencies. Proverbs 13:11, dishonest money dwindles away, but he who gathers money little by little makes it grow. My CPA friend, Randy, when he's helping me with the budget, he looked at my first budget and he says, well, you don't have savings on here. I said, no, we can't afford to save. You can't. No. He said, well, how much do you think you need to save? And now this is in 1978 or $79, so bear with me. But I said, well, unless we could send, we should be able to save $50 a month. And he said, well, okay, now whether you should be able to or not, how much have you actually saved? And I said, we've actually saved nothing per month. And he smiled. And he said, well, could you save $10 this month? And I was kind of like, $10? Well, duh, you know. And he said, write that down. So I added savings, and I put $10 next to it. And I felt this wave of sort of embarrassment, like, golly, $10, what's that going to do? Well, that was the end of December, and January came, and it was a new year, and I'm at the bank, and making some deposits and some checking to savings changes, and I thought, oh yeah, savings, $10. Well, I could transfer that right now from checking to savings. And so I did that on the little ATM, and it went from $10 from checking to savings. And when I was walking back to the car, a very unfamiliar sense of joy came over me. Wow, we accomplished our goal. We actually saved $10 this month. And I went home, drove home to Mindy and said, Mindy, guess what? She said, what? We actually saved $10 this month. First time we've ever saved anything. And she was like, wow. And it was like, oh my gosh. And it was the beginning of this particular verse. He who gathers money little by little makes it grow. Now February came. And I'm standing at the ATM making some deposits and transfers and stuff like that. And I remember my savings goal of $10 a month. And I remember thinking, well, we saved $10 last month. I wonder if we could save $20 this month. And I transferred $20 from checking into savings. And as I'm walking back to the car, I am floating on the clouds, just euphoric, like, wow, we doubled our savings. We have now saved more money in the first 2 months of the year than we have in our entire first year and a half of marriage. Now, what my friend helped me to understand was this principle of little by little. Little by little makes it grow. Makes it grow. These 5 responsibilities are the flip side of stewardship. This is how we steward what God has entrusted to us. And so what I want to do is just ask you simply, are there one or more of these things that you sense that for you, God is sort of nudging you on? Is the element of honoring God with your money. Maybe you think, well, maybe this is what he's trying to do in my life. Or paying your bills in a timely manner before the money runs out. Or maybe sitting down and doing some budgeting. And maybe you need to sit down with somebody that can help you with this, like I needed help. Or diligence, maybe your work habits or your spending habits. And the last is this element of saving. Let's pray together. Father, I thank you so much for the scriptures that you give to us, and the specificity of how to walk in this world, how to manage what you have entrusted to us in a way that honors you and is faithful to what you've entrusted to us, and is a blessing not just to ourselves but to other people. And I pray, Father, that as we ponder what we've heard from the Bible this morning, that we would not just walk away with just some vague thoughts, but that you would help us to actually put into practice something of what we have heard today. And maybe we need to talk to somebody and ask a friend if they would help us with something, or if they would just check back with us, or if we would be accountable in some way. But something of actually following what you're trying to do in our lives to shape us. Help us not just to be hearers of your word, but doers. And we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.